Imagine stepping outside, hearing the faintest buzz in the air. You look up to see a shadow passing overhead, and your heart skips a beat. A dragonfly the size of a hawk zooms by, its enormous wings slicing the air as it hunts down its prey. A world ruled by giant insects, a place where bugs have taken over, and they're bigger, faster, and scarier than anything we've seen before. Now, what if I told you that this was no fantasy? What if giant insects never went extinct, and we shared the planet with them? It's a scenario that might seem like pure science fiction, but what if it were true? Let's dive into the what-if world where giant bugs reign supreme. From massive dragonflies to huge millipedes, we'll explore a world where these creepy crawlers never shrank and even evolved new survival strategies. Welcome to the world of giants. 300 million years ago, during Earth's Carboniferous period, insects ruled the planet in ways we can only imagine today. Imagine the scene: thick, swampy forests teeming with giant arthropods. In this time, insects were far larger than anything we know today. They were everywhere, soaring in the sky, scuttling across the forest floor, and even lurking beneath the surface of the water. How did they get so big? The answer lies in the oxygen. During this period, Earth had about 35% oxygen in the air, far more than the 21% oxygen level we have now. And this oxygen supercharged the growth of many creatures, especially insects, which rely on their tracheal system to deliver oxygen directly to their bodies. With more oxygen to breathe, these insects grew to insane sizes. Picture a dragonfly with a wingspan of nearly 3 feet, or a millipede that stretched over 8 feet long. These were not just big bugs, they were monsters. Dragonflies, for example, were a type of ancient dragonfly that reached up to 70 centimeters, 28 inches, across their wings. Their long, sharp bodies zipped through the air, hunting down smaller insects with precision. Their enormous eyes gave them an almost hawk-like vision, and they used their spiny legs to snatch up prey midair. These insects didn't just thrive in size, they were masters of their environment. Alongside them were creatures like the Mazothyros, a bizarre, vampire-like insect that fed on plants by piercing their tissues with a beak-like mouth, sucking out their juices as if it were a blood-sucking leech. This was a time when insects weren't just a nuisance. They were apex predators, capable of taking down prey much larger than anything you'd expect an insect to target today. But the real game-changer came from a giant millipede known as Arthropleura. Growing up to 2.5 meters, 8 feet long, this vegetarian giant dined on fruits, leaves, and seeds. The earth itself seemed to pulse with life, a world where everything, from the smallest creature to the largest, was out to survive in a dangerous and ever-evolving ecosystem. But the world of giant insects wouldn't last forever. About 150 million years ago, something drastic changed. The oxygen levels began to decrease and the world started to cool. This shift would set the stage for the next chapter in Earth's evolutionary story, one where giant insects would no longer reign supreme. But why? The answer comes down to a simple but powerful force: the birds. The first flying dinosaurs, or birds, evolved with a hunger for insects. These birds feasted on the giant, slow-moving arthropods that once dominated the skies. The dragonflies, once feared hunters, became easy targets for these agile predators. In response, insects began to shrink, adapting to their new, more dangerous world. Over time, the giant insects we know from the Carboniferous period went extinct, their smaller, quicker relatives surviving the brutal onslaught of birds and other predators. But what if those giant insects had adapted differently? What if, instead of shrinking to survive, they had evolved a set of survival strategies that allowed them to stay on top? That's where things get really interesting. Imagine if oxygen levels surged again, and the world was once more filled with 35% oxygen, just like in the time of the giant insects. This would create the perfect conditions for them to grow to massive proportions once again. But while oxygen would help them grow, the birds would still be there, and simply growing bigger wouldn't necessarily guarantee survival. What these insects would need is something more. They would need new survival tactics. Enter the modern-day insects that have survived for millions of years, despite intense predation. One of the best examples is the weta, a massive insect found in New Zealand. The weta has existed since before the dinosaurs and grew large because it lived in a predator-free environment for millions of years. But eventually, predators like rats and birds made their way to the island, and the weta's once secure position began to dwindle. So the weta survived by using a different strategy: isolation. It lived in a place with no predators, but over time, that changed. So, what if our giant insects followed this example? Imagine giant insects migrating to remote islands, thriving without the threat of larger predators. But what if that strategy wasn't enough? What if we needed something more, something that could help them fight back? Let's look at the survival tactics of insects today. Take the cicada, for instance. Female cicadas can lay hundreds of eggs, which hatch after just 6 to 8 weeks. The young nymphs then burrow underground for years, sometimes up to 17 years, emerging only when it's time to breed. This long, hidden life keeps them safe from predators, as they're almost never seen by hungry birds. Now imagine if our giant insects adopted this tactic. They could spend most of their lives underground, popping up only when the time is right, avoiding predators entirely. While this may not sound well, another interesting tactic we could see is chemical warfare, as demonstrated by the lubber grasshopper. This grasshopper produces toxins from the plants it eats, like onions and garlic, and then turns them into a potent chemical defense. When faced with predators, lubbers eject this poisonous brew, creating a chemical cloud that leaves predators gagging and spitting them out. If this tactic worked for small insects, imagine what it could do for giant ones. Giant insects could develop even stronger toxins, rendering them nearly immune to predation. Predators would quickly learn to avoid them, as even trying to eat one could lead to painful or deadly consequences. So now, our giant insects are bigger, smarter, and tougher. But the question remains, could they survive alongside humans? Let's say the oxygen levels went back up to 35%, and the giant insects grew to massive proportions once again. They would be able to survive not just by being bigger and tougher, but also by evolving unique strategies like stealth reproduction and chemical warfare. But what happens when the Chicxulub asteroid strikes, just like it did millions of years ago, wiping out the dinosaurs? In this alternate reality, this asteroid could actually be a blessing for our giant insects. With the death of larger predators, the insects would thrive in a world with fewer challenges. The environment would be perfect for them to take over the planet, filling the gaps left behind by the dinosaurs and birds. Now, imagine how this world would look. The oxygen levels would be incredibly high, and the plants would likely evolve to become more fire-resistant, as the increased oxygen would make everything far more flammable. The smallest spark could trigger a massive fire. And it wouldn't just be the plants and trees. Imagine the massive explosions caused by creatures like the bombardier beetle. These beetles can mix chemicals in their abdomen to create an explosive reaction. If these beetles were the size of small dogs, they could easily start a fire with a single blast. But the biggest change would be the sound. With massive cicada swarms and giant insects buzzing through the air, the world would be incredibly loud. A single giant cicada could easily produce sounds that would damage your hearing, and with millions of them around, the noise would be deafening. As we continue down this path, we start to imagine a world where humans evolve to coexist with these giant insects. Would we grow larger too? There's some evidence that when oxygen levels were higher, life forms tended to grow bigger. We could evolve to be super runners and super swimmers, breaking every record in the book. But even more importantly, we'd probably find ways to deal with these insects, whether it's with specialized tools or weapons designed to keep us safe. Bug zappers, chemical sprays, and even the most primitive tools like sharp rocks could become our best defenses. As time goes on, we might find ourselves eating these giant insects. With humans always on the lookout for new sources of protein, it wouldn't be long before giant insects made their way onto the menu. Imagine a society where giant insect Fridays is a thing, grilled griffinfly wings or deep-fried millipede legs served with your favorite sauce. It may sound crazy, but in a world full of giant insects, it would be normal. And finally, we return to the question, what if dinosaurs never went extinct? In a world filled with giant insects and massive creatures, the battle for survival would take on an entirely new form. Would humans even stand a chance against such monstrous creatures? Or would we find a way to thrive, evolving alongside these ancient beasts? One thing's for sure. Life on Earth would be anything but ordinary. So, what if we could go back to that world where giant insects never shrank? The answer might just surprise you. Welcome to the future of giants.